Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video I'm going to be answering directly a question that was asked of us. How do you take a piece of music that's written in 3 parts and convert it into 4 parts? Okay, well, here I've got a piece of music in 3 parts that I've just put together for the sake of this video. So if you have a look at the first line of music written in black, here's a 3-part piece in D major. And just so we can see what the chords are, I've converted the chords into Roman numerals, so we can see that in the first chord, that must be chord 1, it's a D, F sharp, A chord. The next chord is a 7B, or you might know it as a 7/6, a chord 7 in first inversion. So what's chord 7 in D? It's C sharp, E, G, and I've got this in first inversion. Then I've got chord 1 again, also in first inversion. Now, just while we're passing through this, so to speak, this 7B or 7/6, why am I using chord 7? Because lots of people think, chord 7, never use chord 7. Actually, chord 7 can be really nice. Always much better in first inversion than it is in root position. That's nearly always true. And this is a replacement passing 6/4. So sometimes we might want to go 1, 5C, or 5 in second inversion, 1 in first inversion. But if you want to do that, sometimes 7 in first inversion sounds stronger than 5 in second inversion. So we go 1, 7 in first inversion, 1 in first inversion. Or you could do it the other way around. Okay, so that's what's going on in the first bar. Second bar, we've got chord 4, so that's a G, B, D chord. Then we've got chord 2, E, G, B, passing note at the top. Then we've got chord 5, A, C sharp, E, passing note in the bass that just happens to turn that into a 5/7 in its last inversion. Then we've got chord 1 again in first inversion. Then I've got 4/7. I've included that on purpose because lots of people think about using 5/7. Some people think about using 2/7, but 4/7 is quite a nice chord, you know. So G, B, D, F sharp, and then a perfect cadence going 5/7/1. Here's the 5/7. So it's A, C sharp, E, G, and then chord 1 again in root position this time. And of course, when we're writing in 3 parts, you've often got to think, well, okay, if I've got a 3-part chord, I could use all 3 notes of the chord. Sometimes you might not want to do that. Right at the beginning, there's a D at the top and a D in the bass. So I can only add F sharp. If I just put A, there'd be no third, so it's probably better to have that third in there. So a lot of the time, for example, when we get to this point, well, we're using all the notes, G, B, D. But in other places, you might think there's a good reason to double up on the same note. When we come to something like a 7th chord, well, then you have to make decisions about what you're going to miss out. So that 5/7 chord might sound a little bit thin in 3 parts, where I've got a root and I've got a 5th because that happens to be in the melody, and I've added the 7th, where really it'd be great to have a 3rd as well, but we're only in 3 parts. That's a given, so there's not much we can do about it. Okay, let's move on to the matter in hand. Converting that 3-part texture into 4 parts. Well, if the melody is the sort of given fix, which is what I'm assuming in this case, you're not going to change the melody. If you start writing different melodies or messing about above that soprano line, well, you're beginning to change it into a different kind of piece. So how do we keep the piece the same, but just gear up from a 3-part to a 4-part texture? Number 1, probably keep the melody the same. Number 2, probably keep the bass the same. So maintain your outer parts, and then your task is really, what do we do in the middle? Because where we previously just had 1 part in the middle, we are going to want to create 2 parts in the middle. So this is what we're now going to think about. So if we look at this first chord, well, we had F sharp in the alto part, so we could maintain that. But the missing note, as we said, was A. So here's an opportunity to put it in. In a 3-part version, we had 2 Ds and an F sharp. But now in a 4-part version, I can put that A in and fill out the chord, which is quite a handy thing to do. Well, I might as well keep the alto G that we've got there. And in the tenor part, I could just double that G actually, because obviously when you're writing in 4 parts, if you've only got 3 notes in a chord, well, probably something's going to be doubled. So in this case, I'm doubling that G so that we haven't got anything that's more than an octave between the middle parts. That's often a failing that people get into when you have a gap that's too big between the middle parts. I could have gone up to C sharp in the tenor, but that C sharp slightly dominates the chord if I do that. I could have gone up to E, but that would have been a big leap in the tenor. The G's just next door, so why not? And then maybe I'll have a little shifty around and take the A that we previously had in the alto, put that in the tenor part because it would progress on nicely from the previous note. And maybe this time I'll have a leap in the alto part, and just to reorganize that chord to show you that you can maintain the outer parts where you previously had a middle part. Well, you don't have to maintain that exactly as it was. You might think, well, I'll put that note that we had in the previous situation, this note here, an octave lower, put it in the tenor part. You know, makes for a good tenor line now, doesn't it? These notes next door to each other, even though I've got a leap there. Because I've got a leap there, well, probably I'm going to try to repeat that D as it's a common note between this chord 1 in first inversion and this chord 4, the other side of the bar line. So that smooths over having had that leap in the alto previously. One thing it's perfectly possible to do, and I'm trying to do things just to show you your options, perfectly possible to double a note. Now, you don't really want to do that sort of in 2 chords consecutively if you can avoid it, because it starts to sort of make it sound like we're back in 3 parts again. So effectively it sounds like we are back in 3 parts, but just for this chord 4, not too bad a thing to do. Why have I done it there? Well, I kind of want to maintain that repetition in the alto part, having had this earlier leap. I'm kind of wanting to keep the tenor part reasonably smooth, because that's often a good thing to do. And also I'm a little bit boxed in because my other option would have been to go for a B in the tenor, but that would have meant doubling the major third because there'd been a B there and there's a B there. We're doubling the major third, which is something we try to avoid if we can. Okay, well, let's now restore the plan we had before. We'll put that G in the alto that we previously had. But now we can afford to fill in the missing note in the tenor because this chord 2, this E minor chord, notice we had 2 E's and a G, but we didn't have a B. So now we're moving into 4 parts. It's just an opportunity to pad out the chord and insert the missing note. So I'm going to put that B in the tenor. Previously it was those 3 parts. It's all right. Put the B in, it just fills out the chord a bit, doesn't it? Okay, from there we might keep the alto where it was. Slightly limited options on my tenor part here. I'm actually going to go for an A. Now that of course is doubling the bass note, but the bass note is immediately on the move. So in the next half beat, we've got A in the tenor and G in the bass at the same time. So that's an okay thing to do. And because the bass is moving from that A to the G, it's quite nice to have the A somewhere in the chord. So in 3 parts, it was all right. In 4 parts, sustaining that A just keeps the chord nice and full. Okay, well, you know, we've ducked and dived a bit, changing odd notes in the alto, but how about if we go back to the printed note in the alto, and this time we let the tenor jump up to a D. Okay, so a bit of a leap upwards in the tenor, but we've not really been leaping in the tenor previously, have we? So it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, except for the fact, says he, that we've now got some fifths between the alto and the tenor. So maybe that's not such a good idea. Okay, plan B. What could we do? We could possibly double the A in the tenor. Okay. There we are. That would do. These are the things that you bump into sometimes. You suddenly think, oh blast, I've got some fifths or some octaves or something. But that would fix it, wouldn't it? And it just kind of reinforces that fifth a bit. And then if we stick with the B in the alto there, well, in order to get this 4/7 really working nicely, let's put a D in there because we're missing the fifth at the moment. So previously we had that, but now we've got the full chord, which is probably quite a good thing to do. And then there's no real reason not to have the G we had before in the alto, and that's the seventh of a 5/7, so that would need to resolve downwards anyway, so let's do that. In which case we can fill in this missing C sharp in our 5/7 chord there, and then we could take the tenor up to a D, but that would give us 3 Ds, a triple root. So when we're resolving a 5/7, if the third rising, which is what it's supposed to do from a 5/7, if it rises and creates a triple root, it can fall to the fifth of the following tonic chord. So that would give me a 4-part version of the previous 3-part thing. So what does all this sound like? Here's the 3-part version. Here's the 4-part version. Now, you might conclude from that 4 parts always sounds better than 3. That's not strictly speaking true. And often when you're in 3 parts, you might be writing something that's less homophonic, something that's less kind of block chords. It might be something like a trio sonata for 2 violins and a cello or something, or 2 oboes and a bassoon, where you're more polyphonic and therefore the 3 parts are just more kind of linear and there's a lot of interplay between the parts. Whereas when you're writing something more solid, kind of like for a choir to sing, like a hymn tune or a chorale or something, maybe the 4-part version sounds better, but you know, maybe would be less flexible than some of the options you get for a 3-part. So I'm not trying to suggest that one is better than the other, but I'm trying to answer this question. What happens if I've got a piece of music that's written in 3 parts and actually I want to bolster it up for 4 parts? And conversely, you might look at this the other way around and say, well, what happens if I've got a piece in 4 parts and I want to strip out and make it something for 3 parts? You could look at what I've done in red and blue and convert that to black to see what you might take out and which notes you might reorganize. You notice that apart from keeping the top and the bottom intact, we've kept almost every alto note intact, but we've just changed one. And then we've got to kind of think what we're going to do with the tenor part that kind of makes sense. So I hope that's a kind of useful exercise in converting 3 to 4 parts. And it's something that a lot of people find they have to do for all sorts of practical reasons. Like you might be conducting some kind of choir or instrumental ensemble where you've got a piece of music in 4 parts and actually we haven't got enough people, so we need to put it in 3 parts. Or enough instrumentalists, we might want to reduce it from 4 to 3. Or we've got so many people here that will take this 3 thing and convert it into something that's 4 parts. So it's not an impossible task, but hopefully that's just a very practical demonstration of how you would go about doing that. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, let me invite you to the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. And if you go there, you'll find there are so many things on offer. There's merch, there's Maestros, which is this wonderful group that we put together where we meet for live streams every month and so on. So have a good old look at that. And then there's a whole load of courses out there. Now, if you're a keyboard player, you might want to have a look at our ABRSM piano courses, where we're looking at the music set for each grade and kind of going through it with a bit of a fine tooth comb. So if you're learning those pieces for an exam, you'd find it incredibly helpful to go on there and think, oh, I can learn all about the pieces that I'm going to play and what would be going on, what are the things I need to understand about this piece, what's going to help me give a really good performance of this, that's going to help me get good marks in the exam. But you might be thinking, well, I'm not interested in doing ABRSM exams, but nevertheless, you might find there's some piano repertoire that you'd like to learn if you're a pianist. Even if you're not a pianist, you might be thinking, how do I look at a piece of music and actually engage with what's going on, what's happening melodically, rhythmically, harmonically, structurally, in terms of how the texture is organized, writing for the piano in this case. So there's an awful lot to learn from those courses, whether you're a pianist, whether you're wanting to take those exams or not. So if you're a composer or someone who's just interested in analysing short pieces of music and getting to grips with what's going on, well, have a look at those, because there's quite a lot of useful material. But lots of other things there to have a look at as well. www.mmcourses.co.uk.